Hi, everybody. I'm Lydia. I'm on the marketing team at Flatiron School, and I want to welcome you to the Meet the Mentor series. In this series, we're interviewing some really amazing mentors who are often facilitators of our courses here at Flatiron School and getting to know them, hear their stories. Our guest today is James Hutson. James is a professor and the department head of art history, AI, and visual culture at Lindenwood University, and a Flatiron School facilitator for data science and advanced AI and machine learning. So welcome, James.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Thank you. It's good. We're glad to have you here. Can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and what you're working on these days?
Absolutely. So again, I'm a mentor at the Flatiron School, working with some amazing folks there. My full-time role is as a professor overseeing AI workforce development, really for the region here. Although I do oversee several other programs, but I actually have a background. My first PhD was actually in art history. My father was an artist, and so I came out here originally in 2010 to set up the art history department. Then I was made an administrator to create online and graduate programs, which I knew nothing about. And so I had to go back and get degrees in business. Right before the pandemic hit, they wanted us to open an XR lab. So I went back and got a graduate degree in game design so we could build out simulations and have student-to-student interactions when we couldn't actually be together. And then I was told to go forth and do AI, right, in 2021. So we started institution-wide studies. We have over 200 of them now. And then by the time November rolled around, we'd already have about a dozen studies when ChatGPT was launched November 2022. And then I realized which way the wind was blowing. So went back and got a PhD in AI as well. So if my trajectory is any indication of the success of a lot of the students at the Flatiron School, it's that you never stop learning and you have to pivot with the circumstances and get the skills that you need when you need them.
That's great. And such a unique career journey. I love that you're still mingling in the two different worlds where you're in AI, but you're also in art history. So that's wonderful. Makes you multifaceted. What's something, excuse me, that you're working on right now that's really exciting? Is there a project, anything in particular, especially related to AI?
Yeah, the largest project we're working on is upskilling industry, municipalities, working with economic development councils and the Economic Development Administration to create training programs. So we have an AI Essentials, and I'm gathering just mountains of data through that as well as to where people are actually at, what we need in order to have an AI-ready workforce. A lot of the human elements behind it that really prohibit uptake and learning. A lot of fear, anxiety, misinformation from the media, et cetera. So all that research is kind of coming together and informing how we actually approach it. And so what we're finding is, as with, the classes we teach here at Flatiron, is it's not about solely and not even largely about the technical skills. It's about the perspective, the culture. It's really an attitude shift, a habit of mind shift that needs to happen. And then the technical skills, right, can follow, but it's really teaching problem solving, a growth mindset, and being willing to learn new things, and also knowing that doesn't threaten your identity or your station or your job, et cetera, that we all have to learn new things.
Are there any other soft skills or technical skills? But it sounds like there's some specific soft skills that you're working through with people. So you said growth mindset is definitely one of them. Are there any others, like specific skills that you're trying to identify and help people grow in?
Oh, yeah. As with all the research, we know exactly what skills are valuable now. It's not in doubt. We know definitively which are declining in desirability by employers and which are increasing. And that's directly proportional to developments in AI and capabilities. And so that's why the tech skills go hand in hand. I mean, if you looked at the last 2025 World Economic Forum jobs report, you find that technical skills skills, or understanding at least generative AI essentials shot up, right, 60%. Manual dexterity, basic reading and writing dropped 10% or more, right? Because it's basic, right? Because we're all on the same playing field now, the same level. But what actually started increasing that employers have been noting since before the pandemic were all those skills they said college graduates lacked, right? The communication, leadership, empathy, speaking across difference, or engaging in difficult conversations, right, instead of avoiding them. Resilience, right, adaptability. So if we're talking about the skills that really matter, right, it's going to be creative and critical thinking and resilience and adaptability, right? So those are the ones that are going to differentiate those that successfully, are going to transition over the next 5 years before we hit 2030, and those that might struggle more. But again, it's not technical, it's not intelligence, it's not background. I've only been doing this technical aspect. I did XR for a while, but the technical parts of coding, et cetera, with AI only for the past 4 years, right? And so it's really mindset, right, that they need to be focusing on and thinking about. And self-awareness goes really far in understanding, how to be more adaptable.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there any specific technical skills along with those that you would highlight right now? I know that it's kind of changing, evolving all the time. What are today's technical skills that you would highlight?
Yeah, for any worker, right, today's technical skills would be both AI literacy and fluency. And so everyone thinks now that in the media, anytime you ever hear AI, of course, the first thing that they're generally referring to is one brand, right? One specific model, one specific company, and that's OpenAI's ChatGPT. That's the Band-Aid, that's the Kleenex, that's the Xerox brand name for AI, when in fact it's just one part of AI. So, but knowing how those are integrated across all platforms and knowing how to effectively engage with them for greater efficiencies in any of the tasks that you're doing, personal or professional, right? That's kind of base level now, right? It's actually difficult not to engage in the tools. We do lots of trainings with educational institutions, right? So they don't realize that, Gemini is embedded in every Google document, every spreadsheet, everything that you have. You have Copilot, and anytime you open a Microsoft email, anytime you go into Excel, right? So it's embedded in everything. But what differentiates those that are successful and those that aren't is actually knowing what they do, and then secondly, knowing how to use them to their benefit within a given context. So that's kind of this general. The example I give now, you saw that prompt engineering was a major job that popped up in 2023. It was the hot job. But you'll notice if you do a quick search now, that dropped about 200% over the last 2 years, right? As far as listings for prompt engineers, it got subsumed under other areas, which are now like kind of AI engineers, machine learning engineers, et cetera. So it just became an expected skill. So as I tell kind of the K through 12 educators, prompt engineering, right, in a few years, and it already is in many areas, is going to be like Googling something, right? 10 years ago. I mean, can you use the Google machine well to find what you need, right? It's a base level skill. And then you work your way up from there, right? So whatever models that they choose, but it's really understanding the lay of the land and what the different tools are actually capable of and where we're moving. That really tells you where you should put your effort and time spent in really doing deep dives into different tools or programming languages, et cetera. Looking at how we've evolved over 1 million times, according to the head of NVIDIA, since 2023 in this particular area. So the best thing that I would say for everyone, which of course in this particular audience would be those interested in learning more about machine learning, data science, dashboards, AI, generative AI, algorithms, etc., was of course the technical skills are of course a good backbone to have, but understanding that it's a problem-solving mindset that is the best way to think about it. Continually being curious, looking at what new tools are coming out. It is exhausting, I will admit, because so much is happening. So we have an entire team here that we break it up by different companies. So I handle OpenAI, another one handles Google, another one handles Anthropic, right? So every day we can share, what's happening. But you kind of have to do that to see, such as Comet AI, Perplexity's browser launched, right? They immediately started limiting things. And what happened 3 weeks later, right? OpenAI comes out with Atlas, right? So the forward-thinking conclusion, of course, is going to be that every browser or every company that has a large language model and or an interface is going to have a browser associated with it, right? And so now we have to start planning on what does that mean, right, for how we do our daily work, for, automating tasks. We're already practicing, how can we integrate that into our workflows, and how many steps can it actually take on its own before we have to intervene, right? And then what's coming next? What does that mean for that's off the table for us. We can push those simple tasks off of go in, respond to this, click this, hit submit, right? So we can do those. So then what new tools should we be focusing on? So that's really where curiosity pays off.
Thanks. That was awesome. I think the combination of those soft skills and the technical skills, but it's this with the heavier emphasis being on that growth mindset, being willing to continue to learn all of the technical skills you need to keep up with things. Well, switching gears a little bit, I know we got an overview of your career journey at the top of our intro, but can you dive into that a little bit more and walk us through your career journey? Because it's a little bit more unexpected, and I want people to know that you can take unexpected routes into this world of data science and AI and machine learning.
Absolutely. It's going to become much more common and expected for many different backgrounds. And my history is going to be many people's history coming up, because we did have this understanding since the GI Bill, right, in higher education, that you go to school and it's a 4 and 40, right? You spend 4 years, you get a degree in one thing, you do that one thing for 40 years and then retire. That is long gone. Ever since the turn of the millennium, that has been in decline. My generation, on average, had 3 major work shifts or changes right in their lifetime. My children are projected to have 10. Right, as an example. So this is just a fact of life that my journey sounds strange now, but is going to sound more and more familiar. So I actually grew up thinking I was going to be an artist because my father was a K through 12 art teacher. I grew up on a Native American reservation, the Cherokee Reservation in Oklahoma. For the first 6 years, right, that's all I knew was him teaching art. He got us free art supplies, so there was never a question that I was going to be an artist, right? Because no one ever said, how are you going to make a living at that? Because I'm like, well, of course, my father does this. Then I went to school. Obviously, I got a degree in oil painting, and then finished up and realized I didn't want to teach other people how to create art, but I knew a great deal about the history, and I was fairly good at explaining complex things in simple ways to people. I figured out early on. So I went on for a master's in art history. So after getting the BA at the University of Tulsa in art, I went down to Southern Methodist University in Dallas, Texas. I got a master's in art history. I did the whole graduate assistantship, right? So I worked in slide libraries, which of course now anyone watching this, you'd have to be my age or older to remember the old carousels that went ka-chunk, ka-chunk, ka-chunk. We had to actually physically make the slides and then reorganize them after each class. So did that, then went on for a PhD, because that's the next step if you want a full-time job in the area, at the University of Maryland, College Park. And so I moved out to DC, finished that degree in 5 years, taught in the region, 3 institutions, drove for 2 years between 3 states nonstop, and worked this entire time, by the way, I was working as a bartender on the nights and weekends to put myself through college. So the service industry, nearly 20 years in that to put myself through school while going to that, and then teaching, right? So I'd go between American University and Washington Washington, D.C., to Towson University up in Maryland, teaching, of course, at College Park, right? And then just driving in a Big Triangle. That's also where, I met my spouse. She was also in a graduate program. So then, unfortunately, and this is going to be significant for everyone in the coming years, is I graduated with my PhD at the worst time possible in 2008 when the bubble burst, right? And so there were 33 positions in my specific field the previous year, which dropped then to 3, right? And so it's incredibly competitive, right? So I went to every place, middle of nowhere, panhandle of Texas, Allegheny Mountains, right? Middle of nowhere, Ohio, right? And I just happened to luck out in that I was hired here near St. Louis. So international airport right there, actually had a good metropolitan area. So that was just sheer luck. And so I started up the program here. There were no majors at the time. So I started recruiting, built that up to a healthy number of 30 or 40. Then around 2016, I was made Assistant Dean of Online and Graduate Programs. So my mentor at that time was, of course, going to be Dr. Jason Dude Lively. So he was the one that actually mentored me in moving up in administration. So everyone needs a mentor to show them that it is possible, because you're going to feel that imposter syndrome of, what do you know about this? How can you be in this position, etc. This isn't your background. You don't know anything about curriculum building or online courses or technology. And so I had to go learn. So I went and got, I went for the MBA in business, so I could learn for management, accounting, all of the business skills associated. And then while doing that and building all these programs out and recruiting, I made 25 of them. Many of them, of course, now award-winning and best of as far as online. But then I was told, okay, go forth and do virtual reality. I'm hearing about virtual reality. This is 2019. So at that time, everything was tethered. It was really expensive to do any kind of development. It was a very expensive team that you had to have, etc. So working through that, I realized that a lot of these are going to be built out in game engines. And so for Unreal or Unity, they have templates for XR for different types of training, etc. So there are hundreds of hours out there, just like there are hundreds of hours of how to code in Python out there on YouTube and or on different sites. But that's going through them and holding yourself accountable is very difficult. So so I started trying to do it on my own, and then realized that this is really rough. I need someone to give me benchmarks to want to mentor me to keep me going. So I got the master's. So I went and got a master's, learned the game engines, set up an XR lab, human subject research. How how does this type of learning, improve? What type of engagement do we have? All the whole 9 yards. So we have plenty of publications on that. Then we restructured at the institution, and my new dean then said, again, go forth and do AI, right? So that was fall of 2021. And so that was in October. So in like fashion, I always was very prolific. So I identified, just like we did with XR. I put together the VR champions. So one person in each unit that was interested in doing immersive learning in order to do studies, in order to build libraries, to build out experiences for them. So I just rinse and repeat. I did the same thing. I did the AI ambassadors. I looked at those who were interested in how AI was being used already in their area, everywhere from education to healthcare to business administration, etc. And we did an institution-wide study, and that's my most cited work if you like to look on Google Scholar, etc. Which is very interesting because it's a very deceiving title, because it was way before ChatGPT that way. So then we did that. Luckily, I had a colleague, which is my entrance to coding. who was in the English department of all things. So he was a creative writing instructor, Dr. Dan Plate, which I do a lot of research with. And he also made his own algorithms of Python, right? And so we were put together by our administration and say, you two should talk. So we started making our own algorithms, seeing how that might impact how people would learn, and then learned really early on the same lesson that we're dealing with today, in that even if there is improved efficiency or functionality, or it makes someone objectively more creative, if they identify as what the AI is doing, they adamantly reject it and refuse to admit that it helps them in any way. So that being, if they're a creative writer or they write poetry, then creativity is for humans. It's not for machines, right? So, but we see the same thing, even those that are in business. I mean, I have been given presentations and been stopped in the middle of it, and individuals who have been in banking for 35 years or 40 years go, I have to stop you right there. It absolutely cannot do what I do, right? And then we have to say, well, let me show you. So it's in all areas, right? So it's really dealing with that human element. But we didn't know that. That was the first study, and it was very perplexing. So then I went to Oxford that summer, presenting on, of all things, metaversities, right? So that's when, if you remember, every university was going to have a digital twin that you could walk through during the pandemic. We're like, everyone's going to have this, right? So, which is laughable now. But I was presenting on that, and they have a wonderful pub scene, by the way, in Oxford. Like, there's just pubs everywhere. So I happened across a Stanford neuroscientist who, while we were having dinner, leaned over and she said, I used AI to help finish my dissertation. She seemed so ashamed and hushed about it. And that struck me. I'm like, she's ashamed that she used the technology, even though she gathered all the data. By the way, her research is helping autistic children. So she gathered all the data, did all statistical analyses herself, et cetera, but she helped use it to write the literature review, which is standard practice. It's standard practice now for most science journals. They're fine if you write the lit review with it. They just want you to do the math yourself, right, in that way. So I came back and I said, okay, there's 6 major, that was also the summer of 22 when all the AI art generators came out. So all the controversy of ban AI art, they were all over social media. So I knew I already had to do studies on that. So I came back and set up 6 studies across the US. We said, okay, how is AI going to be used in art classes, from web design to 3D design to drawing to digital art? So I have those going. And then I came back to my counterpart, Dan Plate, and said, because he was in English, like, this is going to impact how we teach reading and writing and research, so, and communication in general. So we should probably do studies on this now. And at the time, you had like OpenAI Playground, you had Jasper, you had some of these other writing tools. So we chose 6 of them. At the time, of course, they weren't that great, as everyone remembers. So we did it across different English composition classes the entire term. We thought this is going to be great. They're going to see how they can use this to help communicate more effectively and efficiently, get their writing and thoughts out there. And what we found was the students just wanted to see if they could jailbreak it and get the Terminator to admit that it's going to destroy us all, right? That's all they wanted to do, right? So they weren't using the tools for what they were meant for. And then the very end of that session, GPT launched in November, the very last tool we had them use. So then we published on that because we gathered some good data on that, comparable with the other tools we looked at. So then we went down for a long winter's nap. Right. And we kept playing with it. Right. So ChatGPT came out. It wasn't supposed to be the official release. It was kind of an oddity in educational circles. Right. No one thought about it because it was released during finals. Right. During the end of the term. So they weren't even paying attention. And they didn't pay attention. And so we were studying all through the winter, end of 22, early 23, realizing this is going to change everything. Right. And so we'd wake up, in a cold sweat, writing administration, like, this is what's going to happen. Okay, we need to prepare now. And I kept getting the response, "Oh, you're being alarmist," right? So it's going to be fine. And then schools reopened. New York State just shut down access to it completely in all their schools. We had immediate bans. It was just chaos. But we continued our studies, and so I just kept going and comparing the data as we went, trying to figure out why certain populations adapted well and liked the tools, and others absolutely hated them. Right. So it took nearly 100 studies to get to it. It was actually Dr. Jason Lively, my mentor, who was teaching web design at the time, coding and the design side, who helped us frame it in a way to test a hypothesis. So the hypothesis was, if the tools did something to augment you in a way that you didn't identify with, such as if you considered yourself an artist, then you probably would be fine being augmented by vibe coding or low code, no code tools, right, to do the coding and programming. But if you were a computer science major and you spend all your time learning to code and to program, that you'd be fine putting off all of what they call the artsy fartsy stuff on the AI tools. So we tested that and said, why'd you use these tools? Why did you not use this for the final version, et cetera? And that's when we finally got concrete, right, evidence that it's tied to both one's identity and vocation. And so kind of that really formed the core of what we're doing even now. Of the biggest areas of resistance that we saw earliest on in our research were computer science departments and English departments, because it hit them first, right? Coding and writing. And so in the same way now, in trying to do workforce development and looking at the institutional level, the biggest obstacle we run into is IT, of all people, right? Because they were the gatekeepers. They controlled what tools people could and couldn't use, right? And so they are the least likely to be learning any of the coding assistive tools, for instance, or any of the others that we have there. That and legal. Legal was the second kind of major roadblock because of the fear of data privacy leakage and all this stuff, right? So all that. So we did those studies. We have over 200 now. I expanded, started a human-centered AI program so that all the students across, no matter what the discipline, we could get them enabled and apply it in their area. So breaking it down into various sections. And then we expanded, realizing that not everyone wants to go for, a full year or 2 years for a graduate degree. They want immediate results and kind of applying these right away to what they do. So that's what led us to look at kind of broader, right, institutional, citywide, countywide, right, types of upskilling approaches. So that's what we're doing now in trying to get a model down that works, right, at scale, right? So that's roughly the kind of roundabout way I took.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Sounds like you've done some really cool research, especially recently around AI. And it also sounds like education has played an ongoing part in your career journey, just going back and learning new things as you needed to. So I'd be curious to hear your perspective on tech education today. So like, what do you think is the value of a boot camp or teaching yourself versus getting like a master's or associate's or a 4-year degree? I think they all have a place.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd be curious to hear your perspective on that.
That's very interesting. And it's actually very controversial as well, with a lot of our research looking at what education in general does, how it's not equipped for this, and it's not really set to prepare the generation coming up for what's happening. And we see that right now, right, with the unemployment rates of recent Gen Z graduates. Among the highest unemployment, right, computer science majors, right, those that did nothing but coding and programming all the way through, because the low level, right, coding and programming is going to change in companies. So as far as what we're looking at, as far as the value, it really depends on what you are, if you're looking to advance a career that you're in, or if you're looking to change gears, right, and move to an entirely new career. So, and how much time and resources and bandwidth you have, right? So, a lot of workers, that's not up for debate, right? So that being all economic forecasts state that 30% of workers will have to completely retool their core fundamental skills by 2030. 60% will have to do upskilling, which means, sure, you'll still be, a coder, you'll still be a systems architect, you'll still be in management, right? But you're going to be doing different things, right? So you're going to have to learn that. So that being same job, different skills. And this is kind of where that comes into play. That being either one of those two pathways I see as relevant kind of here in the kind of boot camps compared to traditional degrees, right? So if it's going to be the 30%, right, that we're talking about, if it's the 30% that have to completely rearrange their entire lives and start from scratch, right, you need more time. And so therefore, more traditional routes. And by traditional, remember that most college students now are non-trad, they're non-traditional. The majority of them are over 25. They work, they are married with children and or are single parents, et cetera. So really kind of on and off ramps. But as far as like educational institutions as traditional, that would be that 30%. Now the 60%, however, would be the kind of boot camp approach, which is I don't need to completely, if I'm an accountant and I hope no one is an accountant because that's going to be really rough for the next 5 years. But let's a bad example. So if you are a systems analyst, right? So you're a broker, right? You're a realtor, right? Whatever that might be, you're still going to have that job, but you need those AI skills, right? And so you don't need to completely replace your core set of skills. You need to layer on top, right, some additional skills in tech to help you do what you're already doing. And that's what boot camps are really good at. If you have to continue working, you just need that additional, how do I apply this? And in all my classes, that's what we focus on at Flatiron is, are we in pharmacy? Are you in nonprofits? Do you work with doing consulting with boards of directors, et cetera? So then, how does this relate and help you specifically? So it's all about kind of tailoring it. Like, well, this probably won't help you as much. So let's focus on really digging into this, right? So this part of making dashboards, for instance, right, is going to be really useful if you're talking to boards, right? So they can, once again, understand, big data really quickly, right, and make decisions, really simplify things. So that's what I would argue is kind of the difference. But we're going to see a radical shift in quote unquote traditional higher ed, right, over the next 5 years. You're already seeing it. That being across the board, everyone is, whether they like it or not, right, adopting AI, right, in all curriculum, right? So it doesn't matter. Luckily, I was able to control my curriculum, so I used it as the guinea pig first. So, what would that do if we put it in something as far away from tech as art history? I also did that with VR as well, so they'll have to buy VR headsets, and we're OER. But so we said, okay, what is this actually going to do? What does it look like? So it's already being embedded everywhere. And what you're finding is a decrease emphasis and need for rote memorization and an increase in the ability to have transferable skills or to see how what you do can move across different industries, right? So it's broader. So it's not just you're only going to be a data scientist if you do a boot camp, right? So that is not the case. You're still going to do, consulting work for nonprofits, right? As one specific example that I'm working with now, and also have these skills to help you with that, right? So you're not switching careers. So that's what I would say is the major difference is looking at the myth that AI is just going to replace everyone. done, right? And then we have to all start from scratch. If you look at what's happening with the economy, that's not the case. What's happening is, yes, you'll have some roles that are going to be eliminated, but most are going to be transformed, right, in this way. We'll just be doing different things, right, for value creation and how we define that kind of moving forward. And that's going to be one of the main things we have to decide, is what does work look like in the future and what do we value?
Yep, that's good. I'm going to switch gears a little bit here to just lessons learned through your career journey. So what's one lesson from your career that has stuck with you?
Yep, that would have to be 2016. So that would that really stuck with me as far as realizing we're not all limited to the path that we're on. Right. That being, we all think and we're told as kids, what do you want to be when you grow up? Right. So, okay, so let's get you focused narrowly on that. I have specific books on this in parenting, in that you should not do that. Right. You should not limit kids to one specific pathway. You want to make sure that they can diversify their skill sets and interests. Right. Because it's going to be necessary. So it was at that time, I was on one track, which would be just to be a professor in that field, right, for the rest of my career. And then a mentor switched, right, and showed me that there's another path, right? There are many paths. There's a multitude. There's multiverses, right, of paths, right, that you can possibly take. But you might not see them or think that you have the ability to take advantage of them because, a great example is, I came from an entirely non-mathematical, non-quantitative background, right, in that way. So what business did I have, running entire programs or businesses and or startups, right? So we do AI accelerators and tech startups. I was a director of technology for a company, et cetera. So how possibly could I do that? And so really it was that realization that to make progress, you have to make your identity small. That being, you are not just a data scientist. You are not just and only a musician, right? So you keep your identity small, right? And then it's easier to pivot, right? So it's not as painful to move in different directions. And then in addition to that, note that anything that is that it's going to be uncomfortable, right? So that being any time that you're comfortable in what you're doing for a period of time, you likely are not growing. Right. So get used to if you want to grow, you want to change careers, you want to advance, you want to adapt, right, to what's coming. It will be uncomfortable. And so you might pull back from that, but resist that urge.
Speaking of uncomfortable, this one may not be as comfortable to talk about, but where or was there a moment where you faced a major challenge or failure in your career journey? Would you be willing to share about that?
Yeah, sure. That was not really of my doing, but fate, right? Circumstance. Which is why we really need to remember to pivot. And I certainly could have handled it, better in hindsight. But so in 2020, we had new administration, and anytime you have new whatever, right, a new president, governor, president of a university, they all have to make their mark. So generally they do that by restructuring things, changing things, renaming things, putting people in different roles. So at that time, they actually merged together, right, various units. And I lost that first position, and I was instead restructured into a kind of director role over a cluster of 5 programs. And so that was that period really showed you that adaptability is key, right? In that, being technically demoted at that point, right? It does sting, right? So, but then what do you do? How do you pick yourself up? And that's really learning new things, right? So, so I was put in charge of different things. And then of course, the following year is when I was told to do AI, right? So, so I'm like, okay, we're going to pivot. right, in this way, right? So yes, you were on, and everyone probably feels as though they're on a particular path, a trajectory of promotion and or a direction in their careers, right? So, but unexpected things will happen, and you have to be able to pivot and react to it, right? Not let things happen to you, right? But react and really move the needle on what's going to be happening moving forward, making new opportunities for yourself, right? So that being, if I'd stayed in the original path that I was in, I certainly wouldn't be known for AI right now internationally. There's no way, right? I would have been locked into a completely different trajectory. So it was all about not fighting the current and having the foresight and really the fortitude and knowing it's going to be uncomfortable, that, oh, this is happening. This is not going to be comfortable. Changes are coming, right? Are you going to do nothing and then just, hit the wall? Or are you going to prepare, even though it's more uncomfortable now, to make that transition later? So that would probably be a great example. Probably one of the greatest setbacks, right? But then led to something entirely new.
Yeah. I feel like that's a good segue, because I wanted to talk about mentorship. And I know you had mentioned that you had a mentor, and throughout this process, you kept learning and growing. So I was curious, two things. How did you first get connected with Flatiron School? And then what inspired you to become a mentor?
Sure. I'm very active on LinkedIn. And so I want to make sure that we share our ideas as broadly as possible to assist as many people as possible with what we're learning about the impact of AI on society in general and technology in general. And so it was there that that I saw the school and reached out and got in touch with representatives, and then met with them to see, liked the philosophy, liked the idea, and that's what really led to what I'm doing now. So it was kind of in parallel that there's not a one size fits all model for absolutely everyone. So not everyone needs to go to college. Not everyone needs, a particular, collegiate certificate in that way. They might need the skills. And they might not have, right, the standard kind of background that you would imagine, right? So, but they still absolutely have the ability, right, to change, to learn, to grow, and to apply it in their own area. And so that's why kind of moving outside, right? So let's go out in the community. Let's go and help people, show them it's not the ivory tower. It's not something out of their reach. It's not a skill that only 2% of the population can actually, master. And so that's really what Flatiron kind of espoused as well, was meeting people where they are and providing the resources and support and mentorship, right, as they look to upskill in a particular area. Many of them that I've met so far really are in that in the 60% kind of margin that we discussed, in that they're not looking to become data scientists. They're not looking to just drop everything and be machine learning engineers. They're looking to, of course, get a valuable skill, right, that everyone agrees you need now, which is going to be in technology and AI, machine learning, data science, all that. But then also, how does it apply and help me in my given area? And that's what we all are going to have to do, right? So that's the trajectory and the path, given our research, that no one's going to be able to escape. There's not a single career, or working or not, right? So even in the domestic sphere, even for retirees, right, we're still talking about this knowledge is still going to be necessary just to engage with the world. Right. So that's how I got connected there. And really the mentoring, instead of just going through lesson plans and proofs and step-by-step, instead of that, really focusing on, let's just talk about your career, right? Let's actually spend time once a week, right? Just focusing on what you're doing. How can we build out something? We did that just last night, where they were looking to build out another arm for their entrepreneurial enterprise in training up and doing ROI analyses. And I walked them through through what we were doing and how to actually take an assessment of what an organization is doing, find out what the workflows are, identify the pain points, and then go into the appropriate agentic AI solutions, right? So with particular worksheets that we developed. So, I mean, it's really concrete, right? So, and we just finished working on that actually this morning and sent it to them. So as far as inspiring me to become a mentor, that's probably that probably would have to be certainly Jason Lively, given that he showed and made it seem really straightforward that paying it forward was necessary. But I say what jump-started it was probably my son being diagnosed with autism in kindergarten. And so what that led to was looking at how can we take technology to improve people's lives. But I knew nothing about it. And so in order to learn, you have to get in touch with people that do know something about that and that are willing to share. And in that particular community at that time, 2019, 2020, everyone absolutely was very open and willing to share about all of their proprietary information and what they were working on, et cetera. And so with each person that I met with and learned something new and had that in my tool belt, I knew that I needed to pay it forward, right? And then mentor anyone else who needed that information because I had gotten it that way. And so that just, kept growing in that way, reaching out, meeting new people, getting more mentors, getting new skills, getting more information that I could then share with other people until we have like 20,000 now on LinkedIn, which share as much as possible. But then, and that gave me the ability to help my son. And so that's kind of where you learn that if we want to get ahead, it's not just promoting yourself, right? It's a rising tide lifts all ships. You have to share it with others who then, of course, if you want something really practical, you're then going to get a better reputation about being a team player, being willing to share, right? Being a good colleague, et cetera. And then that is also in turn going to elevate you, right? And where you're at. So, so that being everyone, once they get to a particular point to where they have something to share, they should be a mentor.
Yeah, that's good. I like hearing about your journey and how you became a mentor. That's really cool. What's the most rewarding part of mentoring students so far?
So it's very interesting because you don't see it right away. It's just like it's just like being a parent, right? So you don't know how what you're doing is going to pay off, right? You might not even live to see it. So really, it's in those retrospective moments. So I keep a social media account just so I can keep touch with alumni and past students, right, that I've had. And so you go on there like, oh, now they're getting married, now they're having children, now they're going into careers, right? And then they come back and they say, it was because of you that I was able to go on and do this. It was because of what you taught me that I could get this job, this career, this degree, that helped, etc. And so, but that's kind of the long game. It's kind of what they tell you as far as mentoring. Don't expect an immediate payoff where everyone is immediately appreciative of what you're doing because they might not see the results of it immediately. So it's like, once again, planting a tree in which you're never going to sit in its shade, right, in that way. But it still puts good out in the world. And you do see that, right, periodically. And then you realize there's an exponential effect to you mentoring them sharing that information and attitude with others, and so on and so forth, right? And so it really... It kind of solidifies that no matter how small you think you are or how limited you think your social or professional reach is, it can exponentially multiply very easily.
That's good. If you could give advice to someone, excuse me, let's start that over. If you could give advice to someone just starting out in tech, what would it be?
So it's twofold, right? Being if we're talking about someone just going into high school or graduating high school versus someone that is mid-career and looking to upskill or change careers, right? The best advice would be don't focus strictly on syntax level coding. right? It's important to understand the structure, right, of it, of how code works, of how, once again, programming works, of what the platforms do and how they interact. But it's more important to focus on the kind of systematic, the systems level thinking of how do they actually work with each other? What kind of logic are they using that you'll have to carry through, right? Your if else's, your loops, right? So all that in other areas, because it really is just kind of step by step, instructions that get ever more complex, right? Algorithmically, and then connecting with other systems now with like agentic AI with different agents all working in tandem. But it all starts really simply, right? So don't think that if you have your first, and this is really the problem with education in general, is we always have gateway classes that weed people out, right? That being, if you can't pass, programming 101, you can't be a computer science major. So, they come out, they go in, they take the class, they don't immediately take to it or understand it because it's not intuitive to many people. Then they're like, this is not for me, and they just give up, right? So the advice would be fight that urge, because that little voice that says you can't do it is wrong. You absolutely can. It's a different way of thinking, but really thinking about tech in terms of problem solving and systems instead of specific languages and specific proprietary solutions. So don't tie yourself to one programming language. Don't tie yourself to one platform. Instead, think about something that is device, programming, and company agnostic.
That's good advice. I like it. I've been taking a Python course, and so I can relate to the need to push through some of the just learning and kind of getting past that. It takes a little effort at first. All right, we're at time, so I'm going to move into our lightning round questions here, and we're going to try to do them quickly. It's okay if it takes a little bit longer, but just some fun questions. So, what's something that you're listening to or reading right now?
The Coming Wave by the Microsoft CEO of AI. And so that one really is talking about how technologies converge and looking historically at the previous, waves of technology like electricity, agriculture, et cetera, and why AI is going to be a bit different, and we can't stop it. Right. So really just thinking through the scenarios and how we can prepare for even more instability, even more change. And the workforce of today is not built at a neuroscience level, as a report just came out 2 days ago, for this type of change this quickly. And so we have to have, some leaders, some individuals that understand that and can figure out ways to soften the blow, right, just neurologically, so we can survive it.
What's one product or tool you're into right now?
Oh, well, my tried and true is going to be GPT Pro. So I pay for the $200 a month subscription. My other colleagues, obviously, they're all Claude all day. Others actually really love Perplexity, right? So that's the go-to. But then, of course, now trying to branch out, because and looking at other things like Base 44 is a great, no-code, low-code coding tool for building apps, right, and websites, straightforward in that way. And then looking at different agentic solutions. There's 4 major ones we're playing with right now. But yeah, my go-to is always still going to be straightforward pro subscription to GPT. That absolutely is the workhorse.
All right. Do you know when your next cohort is?
I think my next cohort is going to be starting in 2 weeks. We're finishing up one this weekend, moving on with AI Foundations in the second in that group. But as far as a whole new cohort, I believe that starts up January 10th.
All right. Where can listeners find you?
Easily, you can find me on LinkedIn. You type in just my name, James Hutson. Make sure it's a T and H-U-T, and I'm the first one that pops up. It'll say James Hutson, PhD, PhD. So you can find me there. I'm happy to connect and always happy to share what I know.
And then my last question, which is just a fun one. What made you smile this week?
Oh goodness! My 5-year-old daughter, who is of course the light of my life, made up a completely ridiculous game yesterday, to where she pretended to be like a Jedi and doing strangleholds from across the room, and we had to pretend like that we were dying and passing out, and so she thought that was the funniest thing ever. So that was hilarious. So that'd probably be that one for this week.
She's like, how I have so much power in my hands.
Yeah, they need power. So yeah.
That's all. Well, thank you so much for your time. It was great to hear about your career journey, and I think our students are lucky to have you as a mentor. So really appreciate you being a facilitator and your time today. Thank you.
Absolutely. I look forward to the next cohort. Thank you for having me.
All right. Bye.